Well, hello, thank you for joining me today again on the church history trail, and we're continuing in Dungannon and we're at Castle Hill, or what's also known as the Hill of the O'Neill. And as you can see, you get a brilliant wee view here. Unfortunately, it's a bit blocked today, so it's a bit obscured today, so you can't see a big lot. But in a clear day you do get a brilliant view here. And what I want to show you now is a wee billboard here, because there was actually two bodies found here, and it's believed from the late 17th century or the early 18th century. And I'm just going to read that out to you. It's human inhumations, and it says the remains of two separate individuals were found at this spot during archaeological monitoring of the park refurbishment works. They had not been buried at the same time, as the latter burial had disturbed the earlier one. They date from the late 17th or early 18th centuries. We do not know why they were buried here. There are historical references of a church associated with the O'Neills on the hill, but we do not know where exactly that may have been. Much of the hill has been disturbed over the centuries, so the connection between these burials and other parts of the site is difficult to ascertain. And so there was two bodies that were found here while they were digging. But the Hill of the O'Neill is not only in connection with Hugh O'Neill and the Gaelic chiefs, but there's also a connection here to King James II and also to the Williamites and the Jacobites, because the castle here, the Castle Hill, was actually garrisoned in 1688 by the Reverend George Walker, whom I mentioned in the previous wee video. And of course he's known to history for his contemporary account of the siege of Derry / Londonderry, and Colonel Stewart for the Williamite cause. So they held the hill and the town here for the Williamite cause against the Jacobites, until they received orders in March 1689 from Colonel Lundy. And Colonel Lundy, of course, is known as the traitor of Derry. And so they received orders from Colonel Lundy to abandon their position in order to reinforce the Williamite garrisons in Coleraine and Derry. And so as a consequence, the town and its castle were quickly occupied by a Jacobite garrison. And on the 13th of April 1689, the settlement is believed to have been host to His Majesty King James II on his way to Derry. And it can be suggested that it was at this time that the old castle complex received its final modifications, and that either the Williamite garrison of 1688 or the Jacobite forces stationed on the hilltop in 1689 were responsible for its modification for use as an artillery fort and also as a gun platform. And you can see the old police station here that I showed you in the last video. And this is another viewing point here from the Hill of the O'Neill. And that's the old police station. It looks more like a castle. It's like something you would see in Scotland. So it is. And you can see over the town of Dungannon and the countryside. And again, this is the mansion house. And in the last video I said that the mansion house was built by the first Earl of Ranfrey, Thomas Knox, but he bought the land, and it was actually a descendant of his, Thomas Knox Honington, who in the late 18th century that actually built the mansion. And so the two ruined towers here that you see are actually the remains of that mansion house that was built here by Thomas Knox Honington in the late 18th century. And so it's great to have these as a part of history. And of course, as I said in the last wee video, the Channel 4 Time team were actually here, and they excavated the site twice. So they did. And I showed you that wee stone there. Well, I can say wee stone, it's a big stone. I showed you that stone there in the last video. And so I'll take a wee walk over and let you see it again, just in case you didn't get seeing the last video there. You can see part of the house there as well, and that gives you an idea of the setup of the house and how big it was. So it was a big enough mansion. I definitely wouldn't want to have cleaned it anyway, that's for sure. It would have took you all a week. And so this is the stone that marks the spot of the castle. And I read this out to you in the last wee video, but I'll read it out in this one just in case you haven't seen the last one. And it says location of the O'Neill's castle and Arthur Chichester's fort. Of course, it was Arthur Chichester who was also over Carrickfergus, if you remember, and I'll talk about him in another wee video when I'm doing Carrickfergus. It says here, this stone marks the location of the principal castle of the O'Neill Lordship of Turighan. The medieval castle was subsequently remodelled and reused in the early 17th century as a military fortification by Sir Arthur Chichester following the end of the 9 Years' War, 1594 to 1603. But the building had been demolished by the end of that century. Its location was identified and its fortifications were revealed during a time team archaeological excavation on the hilltop during October 2007. And I showed you the wee map there in the last video as well, which is one, the wall of the O'Neill medieval tower, and two is the wall of the early 17th century spear-shaped bastion. So I think the way that works is it's actually number 3 is actually at the top there, and then number 2 would be, I would assume, where the house is, and then number 1 around here and number 3 around there, and then the other number 3 would be down at the bottom of the steps. And of course number 3 is the modifications made to the monument, probably in the late 17th century, transformed the site for use as an artillery platform. And I mentioned that, if you remember, just a moment ago, where I said that they'd actually done the modifications for an artillery platform and a gun platform, an artillery site. And so that, as far as I can make out on the map anyway, would be down here in this area here, if I have my bearings right with the map. And as you can see, that's a marquee there, and they use that for events and stuff. And there's also picnic tables here, and so on a good day in the summer you can come here and you can sit there and have a picnic. And even if it's wet, you can go inside the marquee because that's always open to the public. So again, thank you for joining me today on the Church History Trail. And in the next wee video, I hope to talk about John Wesley's visit here. In fact, he visited Dungannon 3 times. And so join me for that. God bless.